I joined the cult, Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, so you don't have to, and I am telling you what it is like to be a student, and oh my gosh, guys, I am emotional. Y'all's support is like a lot, okay? Being at Bethel was a very traumatic time for me. It really sucked. So y'all's love of this series has meant so much to me. Like, I did not think that I was going to be doing this many parts. But y'all are just like being so kind. And also, y'all are paying my rent, okay? Because literally me and my husband just signed for a new apartment, and like the money that I've been getting from the creator fund for this is helping pay my rent. So I love you guys. As promised, now I am going to talk about my relationship that I had with somebody at Bethel and how that kind of like led to the big trauma that I had during my time there. For the sake of this series, I'm going to call this guy Will. I met him in my first year. He was in my revival group, and he was from Scandinavia. I'm going to be vague because like I don't want people to figure out who he was, but he was from Scandinavia, and I was obviously from here, from Texas, and he was 26 years old and I was 18. In hindsight, that age gap is kind of alarming. When I was 18, I genuinely thought that I was so much older than I was, though. Like, to me, that did not seem like a big deal. And he actually did feel uncomfortable about our age gap. And if I'm gonna be so honest, it was me that was like, no, you don't have to worry about the age gap, because he was like freaked out about it. So I don't necessarily blame him, but I mean, I guess that's open to interpretation. Will and I were hanging out in the same friend groups, and we got very close very fast because I needed to drive him home. Like, a lot of the international students, they did not have cars and they could not drive, obviously, so they relied on a lot of the American students to drive them around. So after a party one night, he asked if I could drive him home, so I drove him home at like 2 in the morning after some party that we were having. And we ended up talking until like 5 in the morning, and, you know, talking about like our deep feelings and the traumas that we had been through. And one thing about Will too is that he had had a chronic illness, which is crazy because I ended up getting a chronic illness later. So him and I really bonded like later on because he understood, or I understood finally how he had been living his life this whole time. But he had a lot of pain, and that was something that he was dealing with at the time, and he just like opened up to me about his like insecurities about that. And yeah, we just got very close very fast. We ended up hanging out pretty much every day, like sun up to sundown. I would be over at these guys' house, and yeah, my entire first year was pretty much spent with this guy Will. I'm sure it surprises nobody that I ended up developing a massive crush on this guy, and I really wanted him to marry me, because remember, this is like ring by spring type of vibes. Like, everybody joins these ministry schools, or a lot of people join these ministry schools because they are looking for their spouse. And obviously Bethel is a very like specific kind of church, so ideally you want to marry someone who is also in this cult, okay? Because, you know, a normal Baptist person or somebody of a different denomination, they may not understand your beliefs or the things that you're chasing after, these signs and wonders. So ideally you want to meet someone at Bethel. So I mean, we were best friends, I was attracted to him, so obviously I wanted this guy to marry me. One night we went for a walk at like 2 in the morning. We went to a park and we were walking around, and then we ended up laying down and watching the stars and stuff, and then we ended up kissing, and it was a whole thing. So the next day we obviously have these conversations of like, what does this mean? Like, are we in a relationship? Because that's where my mind is going. I'm an 18-year-old, very naive Juby, and I'm like, well, we kissed, so like we're together now, right? So it ended up being this very long situationship that very much just broke my heart. Will had a lot of concerns of us being together, and honestly, they were all very valid looking back. When I was 18 years old, I just thought that true love could make anything happen. Yeah, but in hindsight, I totally see his points, and his points were, okay, the country that he was in, you had to prove to them that you could afford to care for somebody. Like, I could not just move to the Scandinavian country with him if we got married. That's not how their process worked. You had to prove like that you could afford to care for an entire person in that country. Now, because Will had a chronic illness, he had a very hard time holding down a job. So he could not prove to the government that he would ever be able to bring me there, and he loved his country. Which is honestly super valid, because I ended up going there. Well, I guess that gives away where he's from. But anyway, I ended up going there and I fell in love with it, and I wanted to live there as well. So I understand why he was not like wanting to just pack up and leave this country given all of the problems that we have in America. So there was a lot of like logistical problems that went along with us being together. So yeah, it ended up just being this situationship where I was trying to convince him that we could do this. Like I was like, but true love, like we can figure it out. And he was like, I really don't see how. This was very frowned upon at Bethel, obviously, to be kissing somebody and whatever. You know, I mean, we did do other things, but we didn't do anything like too crazy. We weren't sleeping together or anything like that. But it is very frowned upon, obviously, because we were not in a committed relationship. We were not engaged. We were not married, all that stuff. So he ended up feeling very, very bad, very, very guilty because we are in this moral revolution, Chris Valentin purity culture, and he feels like we need to go confess to our revival group pastor. I begged and begged him to just leave it because I already felt like a bad person. If you remember from when I applied, I had to create a purity plan to even get into the school, so I was afraid that they were going to stop me from graduating because this was towards the end of first year. But he was very adamant that he wanted to confess to our revival group pastor. So we ended up going to her and telling her everything. She was pretty nice about it, but she did want us to separate and like take space from each other. And this left me feeling like I was a very bad person, like I was a whore, like they didn't understand our connection and all of this sort of stuff. So when it came time to decide if we were going to do second year, not all first years do second year. You have to apply to get into second year, and I think that they only take about half of the people. I ended up applying, but I needed my revival group pastor to write me a recommendation to get into second year. So she ended up pulling me aside and she told me that given everything, that she would only recommend me to go to second year if I did some personal like counseling sessions with someone affiliated with Bethel, out of pocket. So I ended up, I think, having to do, I don't remember how many sessions. I feel like it was about 10, maybe it was 8 sessions. During the summer, I would have to take these things from somebody who was actually not a licensed therapist, and I would have to pay for this out of pocket in order to get into second year. Will and I ended the year with the understanding that we were going to take the summer for ourselves and that we probably were not going to be together and we were just going to work on ourselves. So this leads to the summer before second year, and this is where things took a very bad turn for me personally. Follow for part 15.